USA Rugby's bankruptcy is something that perhaps we can learn from, because as we look ahead to climbing out of it and reorganizing the game, a lot of the factors that led to USA Rugby cratering financially haven't changed, and rugby is not suddenly magically going to become a mainstream sport in the United States, and the people in charge aren't magically going to change their thinking unless we learn from a little bit of history. So let's have a look at how we got here and how maybe we can change what happens next. Much of what we're going through really has its roots in an event in November of 2014, and of course what I'm talking about is the USA versus New Zealand game at Soldier Field. What appeared to be a great victory for events in the United States ended up becoming a problem because of the message that it sent. First off, though, what happened though is that the USA played the All Blacks, lost 74-6, played relatively well for a Tier 2 nation against the best nation in the world, hung in there in a way, and it was a sellout, a great commercial success. But looking at it all, USA Rugby, specifically CEO Nigel Melville, got the idea that, hey, we can make big bucks if we put on major events. And we're going to have to form an organization to be able to do that. And that organization became known as Rugby International Marketing, or RIM. And RIM is where the tale gets a little bit sad. To delve more into that decision, we have to go all the way back to 2006, when the USA Rugby board was looking for a CEO and a director of high performance, or director of rugby. What they ended up doing through all of the interviews that they did was select the same person to have both jobs, and that person was Nigel Melville. Nigel Melville had played rugby for England. He was actually the youngest captain they'd ever had, and he captained England on his debut. He was, and is, a very charismatic, very intelligent man, and certainly, in retrospect, you can see him perhaps talking his way into getting two jobs for USA Rugby and wowing the board just a little bit. He was put in, and it became pretty clear soon that the two jobs were actually two jobs. And Melville actually took to the CEO job quite well. He landed a few sponsorships, he increased revenue, he quickly showed an understanding of what rugby was like in the United States. Some of the first talks he gave talked about the size of the country and how much different it was from England, and he understood that. But you also had this idea that he sort of wanted something else. He ended up coaching the collegiate All-Americans on the tour. And so why did he do that? And you can argue that in his position as director of high performance, that might have been something he just wanted to see who the players are. But it was also really a sense that there was something else he wanted to do. There was a sense of unfinished business. His England career was cut short due to injury, something he talked about on occasion, and certainly you got the sense that maybe there was something nagging at him that he wanted to accomplish that he wasn't quite getting to. He started to look for something different and new, and he hit upon the idea of a commercial venture. And the commercial venture was instigated by that USA New Zealand game. The idea was that you would carve off a for-profit arm of USA Rugby. And this for-profit arm ended up calling Rugby International Marketing, had a job of running events, major events really, but running the major revenue-making events and getting major sponsorship. That seemed to make sense, but there was one little sort of smoke and mirror involved in that, and one major mistake that Melville and everyone involved made. Well, there were three things wrong with the plan for RIM, and Melville was fully behind this, as was board member and board chairman Will Chang. And see why that's a problem in a second. But the first problem was that RIM immediately started to take over responsibility for large-scale sponsorship for USA Rugby, $25,000 or more. That seems, on the face of it, to be an intelligent move, right? The smaller ones, people at USA Rugby can deal with them, but the larger ones, RIM handles. But what really happened was that the larger ones that USA Rugby already had in place went over to be the responsibility of RIM. So now USA Rugby was paying extra for a CEO of RIM, extra for other executives of RIM, for the right to use money that they'd already raised. Let's take a break here and unpack this graphic just for 1 second. RIM started paying a commercial sales executive to garner corporate sponsorship. The base pay for Melissa Brennan was actually $210,000, and then she earned more than $123,000 in incentives and bonuses. Yet, if you look at corporate sponsorship combined RIM and USA Rugby from 2014 on through 2017, you find that it's going down, and yet USA Rugby in general is now paying several $100,000 for somebody to make sales that are actually trending downward. The second thing was that major revenue producing events were few and far between, so RIM was going to have to find them or make them or gin up excitement for existing events, and that was going to be a tough work, and it's work of really sort of like shoe leather work. It's a lot of marketing, it's a lot of hard work behind the scenes. It's not really a CEO work, and yet we'd already established that there was going to be a CEO. The CEO was going to be Nigel Melville, still CEO of USA Rugby, spending his time between that and RIM, having decided that he wasn't going to be head of high performance. He got a new high performance. When he did that, didn't change his salary, but he did eventually shift it over partly to RIM. Now the third thing, and this was eventually crucial to contributing to the problems for USA Rugby that we encounter today, was that as well as going into sponsorship and events, which are tough enough to start with, Will Chang, who had no experience really in this kind of arena, and Nigel Melville, who had no experience in this kind of arena, decided that they would form a media company, the Rugby Channel. In and of itself, forming a media company, the Rugby Channel, wasn't the worst idea in the world. In fact, there was certainly a need. A lot of American rugby content wasn't in one place, and if you got some professional production behind it, and they had those people in their back pocket, Pat Guthrie had been doing it for years, and he had a team, they were able to produce that content. That wasn't really a problem. The problem is, in part, that you need to make money out of it, and USA Rugby RIM also had a deal with NBC, and NBC deal got them some of the Plum Eagles matches, so there was that. The other problem was that USA Rugby did not have the rights to the USA Sevens broadcast. That went to United World Sports, which was running the tournament. So perhaps the most attractive property they didn't own. And United World Sports had done a very good job of also leveraging the CRC into a TV property, and were doing that on their own through NBC and later ESPN, but mostly NBC. But the Rugby Channel had also the problems of the fact that rugby is extremely expensive to produce. If you want to do a multi-camera production with announcers and graphics, things like that, it actually costs a lot of money because you have so many people you need to staff. You can do a single camera thing, but we've all seen that, it's adequate. But it wasn't the sort of professional production that was expected. In addition, you look at the marquee matchups that perhaps that they would want to get, and you think of a marquee college sports matchup. For example, something like Oklahoma versus Texas. In a lot of college sports, that would be very attractive. But for rugby, while not an unattractive matchup, it's not in a professional venue. Usually it's not capable really of having a professional live production. Remember, you've got to have some kind of high broadband connection to be able to send that live. The marquee matchup would be Lindenwood versus Life, and that is not a broad-based sports following type of matchup. So all of these things added up to problems for the Rugby Channel. Then you have to start to do the math on that, and you had to do a pay-per access. That's fine, $70 a year, not really expensive. But then you start to think about the math. Okay, so $70 a year, roughly 100,000 members of USA Rugby, and if you're way crazy optimistic, you start thinking 70 times 100,000 is $7 million, and you're pretty excited about that. But it's not $7 million, and in fact, it's not $3 million. It's not $2 million, because a lot of people won't sign up. Some people will sign up just for a few months for the things they want, and then they'll move on their way. Families will sign up, and of course you might have multiple members of USA Rugby in one family. All kinds of things like that. People will share passwords. I'm sorry, it happens. Whenever I've worked in a password protected type of situation, people share passwords. So all of those things added up to the fact that the Rugby Channel was going to have trouble making money, while it was going to cost a lot of money to put on these productions. Melville's inexperience, Chang's arrogance, perhaps contributed to that, because they thought it was all going to work. Let's look at the numbers. And then we come to the big elephant in the room. Whether there's a room or a stadium, it's the elephant in the stadium, and that is the 2018 Sevens World Cup. A big dream, a big event that the board, led by Will Chang and Nigel Melville before he left, wanted. There's a bit of a conflict of interest there, because Will Chang, the chairman of the board at the time, also held a significant interest in the San Francisco Giants, who owned AT&T Park. So you see that suddenly this massive tournament, once they get the bid, is moved solely to the home of the San Francisco Giants. Will Chang stands to benefit from that. Secondly, a major mistake was made when the leadership of the Sevens Rugby World Cup 2018 announced that they had the bid and they were holding it in San Francisco before they had any deals in place. This was a massive error. Normally, when you put in a bid, even if you're putting in a bid for a small rugby tournament in your hometown, before you do anything else, you go get hotel deals, right? You go to the hotels and you say, can we block out rooms at this special rate? We're coming to you, and we love you, so you got to love us back. Rugby World Cup leadership should have done exactly that, and especially considering that they wanted to house all the teams and the dignitaries, everything like that, in one or two hotels. There really aren't that many large hotels in San Francisco to do it. It's pretty much just two. So once they'd announced they were having the World Cup in San Francisco, those hotels turned around and said, oh, so you're not considering having it in San Francisco. You have to have it in San Francisco. We don't care about the deals, right? You now need us more than we need you. The prices went through the roof, and that was millions of dollars out the door through a dumb error from the Rugby World Cup 2018 leadership. When you do the math on all of that, what you end up perhaps estimating is you probably have about 700 players and coaches and support staff and other dignitaries who needed hotel rooms for about 10 days, give or take, throughout the World Cup week. And, some of those people are doubling up, not all of them. And so let's think of it as maybe 500 hotel rooms per day. So that's 5,000 hotel rooms for the entire period of the Sevens World Cup. And if you've been able to negotiate, say, $150 a night, yes, it would be expensive, but you'd end up paying about $750,000. A modest bump up from normal rates in downtown San Francisco up to, say, $300 a night, which would mean that you end up losing out on about $750,000. Rates went higher than that for sure, and it's pretty clear that they lost at least $1 million by jumping the gun on announcing the World Cup before they had gotten a hotel room package negotiated. Now, that's the third problem, and there's actually a secret fourth problem that reared its head when the tournament started. The attendance was really gratifying. The event itself went off very well, and AT&T Park was an excellent venue. But the deal that was negotiated by USA Rugby, specifically the USA Rugby Board of Directors, headed by Will Chang, who, remember, part owner of the San Francisco Giants, was a very poor deal for USA Rugby. Yes, they got gate, and yes, there was some sponsorship money. Not really, because that was a World Rugby thing. But they got no percentage, 0% of the concessions. And as it turned out, as we all know, first of all, rugby fans love to drink their beer, and when you're there at a sevens tournament all day, you're going to be spending money on food as well as concessions. As it turned out, people who manage beer sales at AT&T Park say the 3 days of the Sevens World Cup were the 3 biggest beer selling days AT&T Park ever had. USA Rugby got not 1 penny of that beer sale money. And who signed off on that? Will Chang. Who was CEO while this was happening? Dan Payne. Dan Payne joined USA Rugby with the assurance that the Sevens World Cup was going to make money for USA Rugby so that they would be able to do things in terms of engaging youth and growing the game. As it turned out, the Sevens World Cup lost money. Dan Payne left for another job. That hotel mistake for the Sevens World Cup, by the way, is reflected in the expenses for USA Rugby, in which lodging, transportation, and travel, the line item for that, rose over $5 million from 2017 to 2018. So we see now RIM, turning into a renamed USA Rugby Partners, kept losing money. They were paying their major executives over $200,000 and $300,000 to lose that money, to get sponsorship that they were already getting. And in fact, USA Rugby's income is generally fairly stable. The membership dues is about $5 million. Doesn't really change. The World Rugby grants are known ahead of time for a quadrennial. So that is generally fairly stable. And even most of the event expenses and income are fairly stable as well. The stuff that is extra was all the stuff that RIM or USA Rugby Partners was trying to get going. And they failed to make the big things pay off. So over the time where, after we talked about the USA-New Zealand game, then in 2016 there was that fantastic weekend with the USA playing the Maori and New Zealand playing Ireland in a historic game. What did USA Rugby get? Well, they got some income from the USA game, but from the All Blacks Ireland game, they got a sanctioning fee of a few $100,000. You go ahead to Ireland-Italy 2 years later, same thing. Sanctioning fee, that's all they got. So they're missing big payoffs when they're available. We talked also about missing possibly millions of dollars in income from concessions at the Sevens World Cup. So it becomes a pattern. 2016, RIM loses $1.9 million while paying their executives more than they're paying the CEO of USA Rugby. 2017, RIM loses $4.4 million. A lot of that in production fees for the Rugby Channel, because the Rugby Channel, as we said, very expensive to produce a lot of those games. Sevens World Cup gets going in terms of its preparation and is a net loss in the year before it's held of $800,000. 2018, the Rugby Channel is sold for about $800,000. That's what goes to USA Rugby Partners anyway, to Flow Sports. So at least they're not losing money on that anymore, but they'd already spent close to $4 million in media and marketing by the time they made that sale. And the Sevens Rugby World Cup loses $720,000. But it's not just that. Expenses balloon in high performance. All of those expenses, including the Rugby Channel expenses that went on before it was sold, ended up meaning that in 2018, USA Rugby lost over $4 million. And the year before, 2017, they had lost over $4 million. So going into 2019, which was supposed to be the big disaster, the overspend by the national team and things like that, the mistakes had already been made. The big dreams to go after major payoff events that they then only got sanctioning fees for, and major payoff sponsors that they really didn't put the work in to actually get, and a poorly planned out, over-the-top broadcast partner in the Rugby Channel, which didn't charge enough for the membership at $70 a year, and spent too much on its production, losing millions. All of that stuff added up. Now, who made those decisions? Well, we talked about Nigel Melville. He got the ball rolling. Okay. But everything was signed off by the board. And when things started to go south around 2017, 2018, you started to see board members starting to resign, moving on to other projects, whatever they wanted to say. Almost the entire board turned over in that period. And why did that happen? Because they saw the mistakes they had made and they wanted to wash their hands of it. So we can point the finger at an overspend from the national team, and certainly it happened. And we can point the finger at the fact that CEO Ross Young, who was thrown into the middle of this mess in 2018, should at least have seen in 2018 that there was a problem. Absolutely. But all of that was signed off on by board members and RIM executives who had these big dreams and these big ideas and weren't willing to do the boring work to make sure that it worked, to take the middling or low interest events and make them bigger so they actually made money, and to do the shoe leather work to get sponsorship. In the end, what we do about it is basically what's being done right now. Each national team is getting its own bank account, so that if there's an overspend with the women's 15s team, yeah, all right, okay, overspend, they spend like $20, it'll be overspend of their budget. But if there's an overspend of the women's team, then the men's team doesn't have to pay for it because the men's team has its own bank account. They've already got the money that due them. It doesn't get shuffled around. So that's number one, and that's a good thing. The second thing is that USA Rugby Partners, what used to be RIB, has to be dissolved because the for-profit arm thing just didn't work. And for USA Rugby to somehow think that they've suddenly become experts in event management to the point that they're making huge amounts of money on it, sponsorship and media, well, they proved that they're not really good at that. And what they are good at is finding high-paying executive jobs for people who fail at their mission. So dissolve USA Rugby Partners, USA Rugby can go back to what really works for them, which is a set income, membership dues, World Rugby grants. Try to get that sponsorship. Sponsorship is great. USOPC helps out. That's all secure and not something that goes up and down. And then what they need to do, as I mentioned in a video before, is work on taking their smaller events that they have that are relatively modest and making them better and working hard at it. It's not fun work, but it is work that needs to be done. So maybe we can learn a little bit from history. I hope we can. I hope maybe you learned a little bit about USA Rugby and how we got into this mess. And hopefully we can learn from that and not make the same mistakes again. But if we see somebody leaning that way, keep an eye out. Maybe we're going to have to turf someone out again. Well, thank you very much for watching this video and staying with it, because I think it's an important thing. I want to thank all our Patreon patrons and our special anonymous patrons at Goff Rugby Report, helping us create this content, whether it's our written stuff, the photos, or the videos. It's really important for us to be able to put this out there so everyone can see it, and we want to thank our patrons for doing that. If you want to help us do this, go to patreon.com/Goff Rugby Report, or check out Goff Rugby Report. In fact, there's a link right there and shows how you can support us. And if you don't want to get your name on the screen, there's a way to support us without getting your name on the screen. We understand that some people want to remain anonymous. Please go and help us do that. And thank you for watching, and we will be back.